The desert sky trembled. 6 fighter jets cut through the dusk, afterburners blazing, weapons locked. Below them, a lone helicopter rose from the valley floor, scarred and smoking, yet refusing to fall. Warning sirens howled in the cockpit. Pilots on the open channel laughed, certain their kill was seconds away. Then came a sound they never expected: laughter. Cold, confident, echoing through their radios like a dare. Seconds later, fire streaked across the sky. A jet exploded into burning fragments, the other scattering in shock. What should have been an execution turned into chaos. Who was inside that helicopter? And how did she turn the hunters of the sky into prey? Before we dive into this story, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The cockpit was lit in crimson. Warning lights flashed across the Apache's console as the radar screamed. 6 bright signatures closed fast, spreading like claws on the screen. A voice crackled through the open frequency, thick with arrogance. 1 helicopter, alone. This ends in 30 seconds. The taunt hung in the air, mixing with the sharp beeping of the radar lock. Captain Morgan Viper Hayes didn't flinch. Her gloved hands tightened on the cyclic. The canopy rattled as the desert wind pressed against the frame, but her eyes stayed steady on the threat display. Far below, in the jagged valley, 7 Americans fought for their lives. Falcon 9, a special operations team, was pinned behind boulders. Dust clouds rose with each incoming burst of enemy fire. 2 men already lay wounded, their bandages soaked through. "Viper, we're out of ammo," came the broken call. Gunfire echoed over the transmission. A voice, heavy with despair, added, 5 minutes, maybe less. "If you don't keep them off us, we're done." Morgan inhaled, deep and slow. Her right hand moved instinctively toward her chest pocket. Fingers brushed a worn photograph, edges frayed from years of folding. Her father's face stared back. Colonel Richard Hayes, once called Ghost by the men who flew with him. The memory snapped sharp and clear. She was 16 again, standing on a dusty airfield in Kansas. The thrum of rotor blades overhead, her father's voice, calm yet unyielding. "They all think helicopters are prey. Morgan, they think jets will always own the sky. But in the right hands, a helicopter can hunt." She blinked, and the desert returned. The radar still wailed. The signatures were closer now, cutting through the sky at 15,000 feet. Her pulse slowed instead of quickening. Overlord to Reaper 1. The command net cut in. Multiple hostile fighters inbound. "Abort. Return to base now." "That's an order." Morgan keyed her mic. Her voice was clipped, hard steel. "Negative. Overlord. Falcon 9 is still in contact. I will not abandon Americans." Static filled the silence on the other end. Then, frustration. "Viper, you're an attack helicopter. You can't take on fighters. That's suicide." She ignored the plea. Her eyes scanned the weapons panel, double-checking every count. 16 Hellfire missiles, 1,200 rounds for the M230 chain gun, 4 AIM-92 Stingers, rarely touched, almost forgotten by most Apache crews. Everything she needed. The Apache climbed, rotors biting into thinner air. At 9,000 feet, the aircraft shuddered slightly, pushing past the comfort zone of most pilots. Morgan held it steady. Her father had drilled her for this altitude, for this very scenario no one believed would ever come. She flipped switches, armed systems, felt the hum of readiness ripple through the machine. Her voice dropped to a whisper only the cockpit could hear. "Let's hunt. Below." Falcon 9 was nearly overrun. Shadows of enemy fighters swarmed the ridgelines. Rifles flashing. A wounded operator coughed into the radio. Voice weak. "Reaper, if you don't stop them, we won't make it to extraction." Morgan's jaw set. Her display showed the incoming fighters splitting into 2 groups of 3. Standard textbook formation, perfect for dominating ground targets. perfect for pilots expecting a helicopter to hide or flee. She keyed the enemy frequency. Her words cut through the static, calm and deliberate. "Gentlemen," she paused, letting the silence stretch. Then came the sound that froze cockpits across the sky. Laughter, cold, low, carried with absolute certainty. "You just made the biggest mistake of your lives." The channel went dead quiet. The enemy formation hesitated for a breath, tiny wavers in their flight path visible on her sensors. They had expected a panicked voice begging for mercy. Instead, they heard someone who sounded like she had been waiting for this fight. Falcon 9's leader whispered over comms, awe mixed with desperation. "Viper, whatever you're about to do, make it count." Morgan pushed the throttle forward. The Apache tilted, climbing higher, rotor wash scattering sand across the desert floor. The aircraft looked like a black silhouette rising against the setting sun. Inside her helmet, the sound of her own breathing echoed, not rushed, not frantic, controlled. Every lesson from Colonel Hayes flowed back like a second set of hands on the controls. They train for what they know. Morgan. They memorize doctrine. But when you show them something they've never seen, their training becomes a weakness. The first blip on her display shifted, descending fast, preparing for a gun run. She smiled grimly. Not because she underestimated them, but because the game had begun. And she was playing by rules no one else believed existed. The first MiG-29 screamed down from altitude, nose glowing with cannon fire. Morgan kept the Apache hidden behind a sharp ridge, her heat signature masked by rock and shadow. At the last possible second, she pulled up, exposed the nose, and fired 2 Hellfires in quick succession. The pilot never had a chance. Both missiles struck with a thunderclap, the explosion tearing the jet apart in midair. Shards of burning metal streaked across the twilight sky like meteors. Enemy comms erupted in disbelief. "How did a helicopter?" one voice cried, before cutting off in static. The formation wavered, their tight textbook spacing breaking for the first time. Down in the valley, Falcon 9 saw the fireball bloom. A short cheer burst over their radio net, raw and desperate. For a heartbeat, they believed survival might be possible. That hope vanished under another hail of gunfire. Enemy fighters on the ridgeline pushed closer, bullets tearing through rocks, spraying fragments across the wounded. One operator screamed as a round struck his leg. The team leader grabbed his mic, voice cracking, "Reaper, keep them off us. Please." Another operator pressed a hand to the bleeding soldier's chest, whispering into the radio, "Don't let us die here." Morgan's jaw tightened. She rolled the Apache hard, rotors screaming against the thin air. 2 Su-30s split wide across her radar, maneuvering for a pincer attack, one from the east, one from the west. It was a maneuver designed to leave her no escape. She recognized the tactic instantly. Her father had drilled her on this exact scenario, again and again, until she could visualize the trap with her eyes closed. Instead of climbing or fleeing, she dropped altitude in a violent corkscrew, letting both jets commit to their runs. As the eastern Su-30 streaked overhead, she fired a Stinger straight into its exhaust plume. The missile locked instantly, drawn to the searing heat of the twin engines. The fighter disintegrated in a roaring fireball, fragments scattering across the valley below. The pilot never ejected. The second Su-30 pilot panicked at the sight of his wingman's death. He pulled into a sharp, evasive turn, breaking formation. Morgan was already waiting. She had mapped out the exact escape arc before he made the decision. She fired again. The second Stinger streaked upward, slammed into the jet's fuselage, and ripped it apart. A second plume of flame lit the horizon. 2 kills in less than 40 seconds. Enemy chatter turned chaotic. Screams, curses, broken commands filled the frequency. And then, cutting through the noise, came a voice deeper, colder, carrying authority. "Stop panicking. She's just lucky. I will handle this." Morgan recognized the tone. This wasn't an ordinary pilot. Whoever he was, the others obeyed. The survivors tightened their formation, regaining a fragment of discipline. A new name hissed across the channel. Scorpion. Back on the ground, Falcon 9 crawled deeper into the rocks, dragging their wounded. The cheer from moments ago was gone, replaced with exhausted breathing. One man coughed blood, pressing the radio key with trembling fingers. Reaper, keep us alive. Above them, Morgan adjusted her helmet display. Only 4 enemy aircraft remained, but she knew one of them. Scorpion carried skill and patience far beyond the rest. He was watching her, waiting for her next move. Another MiG made its approach, diving fast from her, 6 o'clock. The classic tactic use, raw speed to strike from behind, fire, and vanish before the helicopter can react. Morgan smiled thinly. She'd been prepared for this since she was a teenager. Her father had called it the mirror trick. When pursued, reverse the engagement. Force them into your crosshairs instead of their own. She pulled hard on the cyclic. The Apache swung in a brutal reversal, flipping its nose 180 degrees. The sudden maneuver nearly tore the machine apart, but now she was face to face with the incoming MiG. The pilot never expected a helicopter to meet him head-on. His hesitation lasted only a second, but it was enough. Morgan's 30mm chain gun roared, spitting depleted uranium rounds at 600 rounds per minute. The stream tore through cockpit glass, shredded the engine bay, and ripped the fuselage into confetti. The MiG cartwheeled out of control, exploding against the cliffs in a thunderous boom. 3 down, Morgan muttered, voice flat. She adjusted her grip, eyes already hunting the next threat. But the victory wasn't without cost. A jagged piece of shrapnel from the blast sliced into her Apache side, punching through the armor plating. Warning lights flared. Hydraulic pressure dipped. The entire aircraft shuddered, tail rotor vibrating violently. Morgan's chest slammed against her harness as she wrestled the stick. Smoke curled faintly from the right engine cowling. Her breathing grew heavy, air loud in the comms. But her voice when it came was iron. Still flying, the survivors circled warily above, 3 shadows against the dimming sky. Their confidence was gone, but so was their recklessness. They had seen too much destruction, lost too many friends, and now their leader moved into place. Scorpion's jet banked with precision, wings flashing silver in the low sun. He spoke calmly over the radio. Words meant as much for her as his own men. She's no ghost, just flesh and blood. I will break her. Morgan's eyes narrowed behind her visor. Her father's lessons rang in her memory. Ghosts were never seen until it was too late, and she intended to keep it that way. The battlefield hung on a knife's edge. Falcon 9 had minutes left. Her Apache trembled with damage, systems screaming for attention, and across the sky, Scorpion waited, ready to test everything she had ever learned. The hunt was far from over. Scorpion had logged over 2,000 flight hours. His reputation stretched across borders, whispered in fighter squadrons from the Black Sea to the Persian Gulf. Cold, methodical. He treated combat like chess, every move calculated, every kill inevitable. He saw Morgan's Apache as nothing more than an easy trophy. To him, this was cleanup work. A simple reminder to his squad that discipline and training always triumphed. Over the comms, he said flatly, "The helicopter is mine." 2 medium-range missiles launched from his wings, white trails spiraling downward. Morgan snapped the Apache into a dive, chaff exploding behind her like glittering sparks. She hugged the mountain ridge so close the rotors almost kissed stone. The missiles lost lock and slammed into the cliffs, detonating in twin fireballs. The explosion sent smoke and rock plumes into the sky, briefly blinding both sides. Morgan used the chaos, rolling out of the cloud and loosing a hellfire across the valley. The shot streaked wide, forcing Scorpion to bank violently. It missed by meters, but it was enough to rattle his aura of untouchable calm. He snapped an order to his wingman, his tone harsher than before. One Su-30 broke formation to cover him, diving in for an angle. Morgan tracked its movement, reading the hesitation in the pilot's turn, a rookie mistake under pressure. She pulled the trigger, another stinger lit off the rails. The missile hit square in the belly. The Su-30 folded in on itself, rolling into a flaming spiral that painted the horizon red. Scorpion cursed in Russian, his composure fraying. Now only 2 aircraft remained, Scorpion's own jet, and a lone MiG tasked with his protection. The odds had narrowed, but the threat had sharpened into something more dangerous than numbers. On the ground, Falcon 9 had nothing left. Their rifles clicked empty, magazines scattered in the dirt. A desperate call broke over the net. "We're out." They're climbing the ridge. "We're out of time." Morgan's breath hissed inside her mask. She keyed her mic, shouting over the roar of her damaged engines. "Hold for 2 minutes, just hold above." Scorpion orchestrated the trap. He had the MiG swing wide, driving Morgan into a funnel. One Predator above, one behind, classic kill box, designed to squeeze her until she broke. Morgan feigned panic, letting the Apache shudder in a downward spiral. Smoke trailed from her wounded engine, the craft wobbling like prey about to fall. The MiG closed greedily, convinced victory was seconds away. But it was an act. At the last instant, Morgan snapped the Apache flat, swinging broadside. The MiG flew straight into her crosshairs. Her 30mm cannon thundered. A stream of uranium-tipped rounds punched through cockpit glass, tearing the jet apart in midair. The explosion lit her visor with fire. The MiG was gone. That left only Scorpion. The ace who had promised to kill her now flew alone. Silence filled the radio channel for 3 heartbeats. Then his voice came back, colder than ever. "You're clever, but I will end this." Morgan could see his jet circling, searching for the kill angle. He wasn't reckless like the others. He was patient, deliberate, waiting to strike where she couldn't defend. Down in the valley, Falcon 9's final line collapsed. Hostiles reached the ridgeline, rifles raised, preparing to pour fire down onto the pinned Americans. The team leader whispered through gritted teeth, "Reaper, we won't last another minute." Scorpion chose that moment. His jet locked onto the ridge, targeting not the Apache but the soldiers below. 2 missiles streaked downward, smoke tails cutting the dust sky. Morgan didn't think she reacted. She dove the Apache between the ridge and the incoming missiles, trading her own survival for theirs. Her thumb mashed the launch key, and a stinger ripped away from her rail. The missile struck one of Scorpion's projectiles in midair. The detonation flared so bright it seared the valley in white light. The second missile spiraled off course, blasting harmlessly into the desert floor. Falcon 9 lived, barely. The soldiers screamed in shock, half from relief, half from terror. One voice gasped into the comms. She just blocked a missile with another missile. But Morgan had paid the price. The Apache rocked violently as fragments tore into its fuselage. Warning klaxons shrieked. Hydraulic lines bled pressure. Smoke curled thick from the starboard engine. Her helmet display flashed red across every system. For a heartbeat, the Apache looked like it would fall from the sky. She gritted her teeth, fighting the stick, forcing the wounded machine to obey. Across the radio, Scorpion was silent. 3 long seconds passed, then his voice returned, low and shaken, stripped of arrogance. "She's not human. She's a monster." Another pause, heavy with frustration. Then finally, "Defeat, I'm done. I'm leaving." His jet broke away, afterburners flaring as he fled toward the border. The hunter who had promised her death now chose retreat. Morgan didn't follow. Chasing him meant abandoning Falcon 9, and her mission was never about kill counts. It was about keeping 6 Americans alive. She keyed the command net, her voice hoarse but steady. "Overlord, this is Viper. Airspace is clear. Returning to support Falcon 9. Her Apache groaned, scarred and bleeding smoke, but still airborne, still fighting. Below, Falcon 9 staggered to their feet, dragging the wounded. They looked up through the haze at the helicopter circling above, scarred but defiant. One whispered to another, "She's still here." She's still flying. The desert quieted for the first time in hours. Gunfire tapered, echoes fading into dusk. But in the cockpit, alarms continued to scream, flashing red warnings across Morgan's visor. To anyone watching, the Apache looked moments from falling. Yet the rotors kept spinning. The silhouette remained steady against the horizon. And in that fragile balance, the battle turned. The soldiers on the ground had hope. The enemy scattered. And the duel between Ace and Predator had ended not with a kill, but with survival. Morgan pulled the stick, banking the Apache back toward the ridge. Her breathing steadied, controlled, unshaken despite the chaos. She whispered under her breath, words only she could hear, still flying. The fight with Scorpion was over, but the war for survival was not. The sky was quiet now. Smoke drifted across the valley where wreckage still burned, painting the horizon in shades of black and crimson. Morgan steadied her Apache, keeping the rotors level despite the constant vibration of damaged systems. Below, enemy fighters scrambled in panic. She fired short bursts of the chain gun, walking rounds across the ridgeline. Rocks exploded, forcing the attackers into retreat, clearing the way for Falcon 9. The special operations team staggered toward the extraction zone, dragging the wounded. Dust swirled as a pair of Blackhawks swept in low, their silhouettes sharp against the setting sun. The rotors kicked up waves of grit as ropes dropped. Falcon 9 climbed aboard, voices hoarse, bodies bruised, but alive. One soldier, pale from blood loss, forced himself to sit upright. His arm shook as he raised a trembling thumb toward the Apache circling above. Morgan caught the gesture through her cockpit camera. Her throat tightened. She didn't answer on comms, but her helicopter dipped slightly in acknowledgement, a silent salute between those who had fought and survived together. Minutes later, the valley emptied. Blackhawks rose, carrying Falcon 9 out of danger. Morgan pulled her Apache into a wide arc, the damaged frame groaning but still obedient. Her mission was complete. She guided the crippled aircraft back across the desert air. 3 hours of tense silence broken only by warning tones. Every vibration felt like it might be the last, yet the machine refused to give in. When she touched down at Fort Redstone, the flight line was already crowded. Dozens of pilots, maintainers, and soldiers had gathered. Word of her fight spreading faster than any official report. They stood in stunned silence as the battered Apache rolled to a stop. The rotors slowed. Smoke curled from the tail. Morgan popped the canopy and pulled off her helmet, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead. For the first time that day, she exhaled without urgency. Lieutenant Colonel Paulson stepped forward, boots crunching against the concrete. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and respect. What you just did doesn't exist in doctrine, but after tonight, it does. Morgan climbed down, her legs stiff from hours in the seat. She met Paulson's eyes but didn't answer. Words felt unnecessary. The battlefield had already spoken for her. From the crowd, a man in an Air Force flight suit broke ranks. His patch marked him as an F-22 pilot, a veteran of countless sorties. He shook his head slowly, still processing what he had heard. "I've flown fighters for 8 years," he said, voice carrying over the hush. "I thought helicopters were only support, but after today, you forced all of us to relearn the sky." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. For fighter pilots to admit respect for a helicopter crew was unheard of. Yet no one could deny what had happened over the valley. Morgan gave a tired nod, then stepped away from the crowd. She carried a small flight bag, worn and faded. Inside, beneath spare gloves and checklists, rested her father's notebook. She sat alone on a bench near the hangar, the Apache smoldering quietly behind her. The notebook opened easily, pages lined with diagrams and sketches. Her father's handwriting, bold and deliberate, filled each margin with theories others had laughed at. On the final page, a single line stood out, written in darker ink. "One day, helicopters will make the sky bow." She traced the words with her finger, her chest heavy with the weight of memory. Footsteps approached, Paulson stood again, but this time he carried an envelope marked classified. He set it beside her, his tone low. Orders from the Pentagon. Immediate reassignment. Morgan flipped the envelope open. Her eyes scanned the header, First Experimental Aerial Combat Group. Beneath it, in bold commanding officer, Captain Morgan Hayes. Paulson watched her reaction carefully. They want you to build something new. A unit that takes what you proved today and turns it into doctrine. Air-to-air combat from helicopters. Morgan closed the notebook slowly. The words of her father and the ink of official orders seemed to merge, bridging past and future. She understood now that his dream wasn't just theory, it was legacy. Weeks later, she stood on a new tarmac, far from Fort Redstone. Rows of Apache helicopters gleamed in the evening light, upgraded with experimental systems. Mechanics moved with urgency, preparing them for training flights. Morgan walked in front of them, her boots echoing against concrete. Pilots saluted as she passed, eyes bright with expectation. They knew her story. They wanted to learn. She stopped at the front of the line, watching the horizon flare with crimson light. The sunset bathed the Apaches in fire, turning their frames into shadows of predators. For a moment, it felt as if her father stood beside her again. The air was still. She spoke quietly, almost to herself, yet every pilot nearby heard. There's no such thing as impossible, only what no one's dared to try. The rotors of the new fleet began to spin, thunder rolling across the field, and Morgan Hayes' call, sign Viper, prepared to lead them into a future where helicopters no longer ran from the sky, but claimed it.